So will this wave of knee-jerk anti-liberalism in favor of magical thinking that conservatives will act like liberals if we all think hard enough that they will just take Justin Trudeau now? The truth is that it already did, right? And he reacted. And he won a landslide on top of it. Okay, so let's go back here, okay? Like to a year or even a few months before the election. Trudeau was ahead in the polls. And then he started talking about balanced budgets, and we didn't really like that. And he screwed up badly on C-51, and we didn't really like that. And so Canadians said, we want to get rid of this Harper guy, but, we've got this weak tea centrist liberal here that wants to balance budgets and bring in the security state. We don't want that. How about the NDP? And we looked towards this, and we looked at this very seriously. Because Trudeau seemed a little too right-wing. We wanted a progressive option. History may forget to record that the NDP nearly won. And the truth is that they really nearly did. And then Harper starts playing the anti-Islam card. Very similar. This very much foreshadowed what Donald Trump did. And you can say what you will about this, but what it comes down to is that Trudeau had the brand recognition necessary to fight back against it. So now there's this conservative MP named Kellie Leitch that seems to want to copy Trump. Well, we just had that election. Instead of copying Trump, why don't you copy Harper, because Trump copied Harper? That tactic lost. You want to repeat a losing tactic and lose again? Okay. I'm happy enough to keep you out of office. Go for it. Trudeau had the political smarts that Clinton didn't have. He saw it coming and he reacted. He beat the NDP at their own game, and they're still figuring out what to do. It was Paul Krugman that pointed out that Canada is always ahead of the curve, that we should look to Canada for a taste of the future, and yet we're constantly told to expect the effects of American elections to be felt here. We've got this backwards. I think that certain voices in the Canadian commentariat may want to adjust their analysis. Canada leads the way. Canada is always ahead of the curve. It already happened here. And he co-opted it, and if we're lucky, we can get a renegotiation of the NAFTA out of it. Hey, a girl can dream, right? Trudeau is the anti-elite backlash. And the Conservatives are the party of the elites. The question is whether Trudeau can hold this, right? Whether Trudeau's policy, whether what Trudeau can accomplish holds up to his rhetoric, and whether he can hold all of these voters. Trudeau won for two reasons. Number one, he was able to get a lot of the NDP voters onto his side, and number two, he was able to increase turnout. That's kind of the conventional wisdom in the United States, right? Is that Trump was able to win by getting people that don't normally vote to vote for him. Trudeau was also, and actually legitimately was able to win by getting people that don't normally vote for him to vote for him. It wasn't from young voters. I mean, to an extent it was from left-leaning voters, but it was mostly from from apolitical voters, people that don't normally vote. And so can he hold that? My analysis from the start, and I wasn't actually, I might have been. I don't remember. But my analysis at the start of this was that what Trudeau needs to do is hold his base on the left. He needs to avoid swinging right. If he swings right, then the same thing that happened to Jean Chrétien will happen to him. And it might take a few years, it might take a few cycles. But the end result is that people are going to be totally disillusioned with the liberals because they'll be seen as Republican light or conservative light, right? And they'll say, well, we don't like the conservatives, and we don't want this party that is an inch to the left of them on the spectrum. We want a real progressive option. And it seemed like Trudeau had managed to figure that out. But what's a little less clear now, a year later, is whether he figured, like, he seems to have figured it out, but is he actually going to follow through with it, or is it just marketing, right? And if the if figuring out that what Canadians want is a real progressive option leads to the Liberal Party doing more progressive marketing and more conservative policy, then that's going to destroy them, right? If the epiphany in the end is that they need to pretend they're more progressive while continuing on the same path they were moving on, Trudeau's been very lucky in that the NDP has been very weak during his period, right? The NDP is going through an existential crisis. Somehow they got taken over by by a red Tory, and they're getting destroyed, and they're getting eaten out by the inside. They're losing their base. They're trying. They don't know what to do. They don't have any way. They don't seem to have any kind of they've lost their principles, right? And so, I mean, the NDP usually pulls at least 10% of the vote. Like 10% is a floor for them. On a good year, they can get around 20%. And they're a fixture in the Canadian system, right? Like this isn't the existence of the NDP is not like they've been elected every election since I think the 60s. And they were called the CCF before that, and if you include that, I think there were the Progressives before that. I think, there's always been a third party in Canada, and they've always been elected. They've always held seats. Always since the Progressive era, anyways, 1910s or so. It's blurry, but it's for the last 100 years. There's been a third party in the Canadian Parliament consistently, and there have been fourth and fifth and sixth parties. But there's been a strong third party in Canada pretty much consistently for the last 100 years. But the last cycle, it's lost its point. It's lost its purpose. It's lost its aim. Like I say, somehow they let a red Tory take over. And he's screwed everything up for them. And it's allowed a big chunk of the Canadian electorate, like I say, 10, 15, 20%, to start looking more seriously at what they would normally consider to be a weak centrist party. Even considering that weak centrist party is extreme left-wing by American standards, because American standards are insane, right? The American spectrum is it's you can have the extreme right or the absurd right? There is nothing in the American spectrum that is not extremely right-wing. Even Bernie Sanders would. A lot of people would suggest that Bernie Sanders would be a conservative in Canada, right? I think that's a bit of a. Certainly, Elizabeth Warren would be, she would be, even her more recent policy positions, Elizabeth Warren would be considered a right-wing liberal at best, and probably a centrist conservative in Canada. Sanders is a little bit funnier, but Warren for sure is a right-wing liberal, which means she could be in either party, right? That sounds crazy to Americans, but it's the fucking truth. And in most places in the world, Elizabeth Warren, Barack Obama would be considered outside the spectrum in most places, right? To the right. So, but I mean, like this. Have I lost my train of thought here? Yeah, I was saying that what he needed to do in order to, have a successful period and build, keep the party strong, is to avoid being seen as drifting too far right. And what I worry is that his office and he himself are too convinced in the power of marketing They seem to be beholden to the idea that policies that there is not a causal effect between policy and voting indication, and that so long as people think he's progressive, he can be as right wing as he wants, and they come up with silly things like social licenses, nonsense like this, right? In order to try and justify this, and I worry about this because it's not going to work. We're not going to fall for that. We'll take his. I mean, what's the actual reality is that a lot of people wouldn't even understand it, right? I'm looking at it from kind of a critical. I'm looking at it from kind of a CLS perspective, right? And I'm saying, well, this is just a ploy by the ruling establishment to try and pretend that it's just it's a harebrained excuse to put a policy through, right? Try to convince people that they make up this term and then they define it by what they want to do and then they use that as an it's nonsense, right? But what's the actual reality behind it is that that's too complicated for most people to even understand. They're just going to look at the policy. They're going to say, well, he approved the pipeline, and you'll end up with these these liberal professors talking about social policies, and they'll just be like, whoop, 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 and it'll just go right through their head, right? Which ironically is the right thing. I mean, that's what should happen because it is nonsense, right? So I mean, I'm a little worried about that, but and if you want to apply that to the American election, that's probably what you're going to see. And that's really the question that Trump needs to have. Can Trump hold his base? I mean, he's not going to do a lot of what he said he was going to do, right? He's not going to bring those jobs back. He's not going to reverse these trade deals. So, what does Trump need to do to hold his base? Be more racist? I don't know. I know that what Trudeau needs to do to hold his base is to avoid the perception of swinging too far back to the right, because in Canada we don't have this idea of a liberal elite in New York. We have this idea of a conservative elite in the oil patch, and that's what he needs to, from a public relations perspective. Trudeau doesn't really need to distance himself from bankers. What Trudeau needs to distance himself from is oil executives, because they're the bad guys. They're the establishment. They're the elite. And a lot of the backlash was against that. It was against Alberta. It was against the oil industry. And we see that he is being very collaborative with with the oil establishment, which is what our establishment is, right? But that's what he needs to avoid. Like I say, I worry that he thinks that he can just put out propaganda and then hobnob with the oil executives and everything's okay. Come up with nonsense like a social license and that's all right. Everything will be hunky dory. No, people are going to react poorly to this, and I mean he's not gonna swing those hardcore conservatives. He has no chance at swinging the conservative base. But he will lose all those voters on the left. And we'll be left in the same position that we were, or the Liberals will be left in the same position that they were previously, which is, a stub on the right and a rising left. The problem for the left right now is that the left has nowhere to go because the party that they should be attaching themselves to has been co-opted by a fucking red Tory. You get rid of that guy, you get back to grassroots policies in the NDP, and Trudeau is probably cooked. Not through, some white supremacist backlash, but through an anti-oil traditional left-wing movement. I think that's what's coming here. We just gotta get rid of Mulcair first. And unfortunately, it might lead to a short-term conservative government. But it's Trudeau not following through, right? Trudeau was the anti-elite backlash, but he's also the elite, right? And I mean, like I say, a lot of us on the left, we knew this. We're not shocked by it. We knew what we were voting for. We just hoped that it would be a little we hoped he would learn the lesson and have a better grasp of what it is that the electorate actually wants, which is not this movement towards the right. All the money's on the right, all the power's on the right, but all the people are on the left. And you only get one vote, right? Millions of dollars, one vote. Tens of dollars, one vote. That's the fundamental error that the Liberals keep making. They keep thinking that more money means more votes, and they keep getting killed by it. Again, it seemed like he had figured that out, but it's becoming more clear that all he figured out was that he needs to pretend. Well, it's the old adage, right? The Liberals govern on the left. Sorry, the Liberals campaign on the left and govern on the right, and we keep falling for it. Except that we don't fall for it. We expect that at some point they're going to figure out that if they keep doing that, they're going to get destroyed. And this is probably their last chance. They were really hanging by a thread there for a while last year. They were on the brink. He still has time on a couple of issues, right? But it's becoming less and less likely. Like I say, the left needs a party, and so we have to get rid of Thomas Mulcair. So long as Thomas Mulcair stays in place, Trudeau will be Prime Minister. And if Mulcair is replaced by another Mulcair, then Trudeau will be Prime Minister. But, like, this resentment on the left, like, it's not going away. And it's going to find a way out. So the Green Party, again, if we're going to take over the Green Party, we have to get rid of Elizabeth May first, too. Or through some other party. Canada's ahead of the curve. Trudeau was the anti-elite backlash. And if you're looking at it from the States, you should be trying to see what you can gather, what you can glean out of the future of Trump by looking at Trudeau. You should not be looking at the United States and saying there was this white supremacist uprising against Trump, so therefore no. We pushed them back. We won that fight. It's how it has always been in history, is it not? Canada tends to win these battles while America loses them. And in recent years, we've been fighting it. We've been fighting these battles first. Maybe it's the whole time moving backwards thing, right? I don't know. But do I think Trudeau's... No, I don't think Trudeau's going to have to deal with this, really, not seriously. The media is going to push it. The media wants him to deal with it, right? Because the media wants Canada to be a second-rate clone of the United States, but that's not what actually happens. Canadians, again, once again, it's just another example of how the media does not represent the country. And we're going to see this happen the other way. You should not look at the last election in the States as a harbinger of the next election in Canada. You should look at the way the last election in Canada unfolded as a way to understand what's going to happen in the United States. And right now, I would have to say that it's going to be a lot of disappointment. But I mean, that's not a profound prediction. Right?